You followed the exact instructions you were given. You secured the formal degree, you clocked in precisely on time, and you played the game exactly as it was explained to you. Yet you are sitting there drowning in high-interest liabilities, staring at a bank balance that refuses to grow, and quietly internalizing the fear that you are failing at adulthood. To understand why the math isn't working, we have to look back at the coordinates your parents used. In 1978, the system was incredibly linear. Your parents executed a specific financial script: work hard, show loyalty, buy a house, and the macroeconomic machine automatically insulated them from ruin. They achieved a level of middle-class stability that felt permanent. Because it worked so flawlessly for their unique coordinate in history, they handed that exact checklist down to you. But they forced you to navigate using their outdated coordinates, while the entire economic landscape was being systematically demolished right behind them. This internal friction originates from a mechanical mismatch. You are navigating a hyper-volatile landscape using the rigid coordinates of a map printed in 1978. Let's run a strict audit on the first institutional lie, the promise of the corporate umbrella. For a generation, unquestioning worker loyalty was a hard currency. You gave 30 years to a single desk, and in exchange, you received automated salary raises, comprehensive family health care, and a legally guaranteed defined benefit pension. Then the 1980s arrived, bringing the invention of corporate downsizing. Almost overnight, executive boards stopped tracking long-term workforce loyalty as an asset. That 20-year veteran at the exact same desk was re-indexed as a stagnant, expensive financial liability. This graphic illustrates the mechanical shift that destroyed the old contract. Corporations systematically replaced locked pensions with self-directed 401k portfolios. They took the structural risk of retirement insolvency, moved it entirely off their own balance sheets, and dumped it directly onto your personal bank account. You were raised to operate as a dedicated company man, absorbing immense corporate pressure and never disrupting the hierarchy. Yet you were forced to deploy those rigid behaviors inside a hyper-volatile gig economy casino that explicitly targets expensive employees. When you faced a sudden layoff cycle in 2008 or 2023, you probably sat in isolation, wondering what you did wrong. That disruption reflects the mathematical certainty of playing by 1970s rules inside an economic system where the house has already rigged the slot machines. That same structural blindness applies to higher education. In the previous economy, a university credential functioned as a direct pathway to the middle class. Regardless of the major, that paper document satisfied the institutional entry requirements for premium corporate tracks and suburban stability. Looking at this chart, we can see exactly where the advice broke down. The left bar represents the 1970s, where executing a minor part-time shift could mathematically cover tuition costs. The right bar reveals the modern reality, where that advice transitions into pure delusion due to skyrocketing institutional pricing. Based on their parents' rigid certainty, an entire generation absorbed tens of thousands of dollars in high-interest liabilities. They took on predatory debt structures, only to find themselves working entry-level jobs that don't even require their specialized degrees. The deepest damage here is the internalized sense of failure. Modern adults rarely blame the obsolescence of the advice. Instead, they agonize over picking the wrong major and drown in unearned structural shame. This shame connects directly to a psychological pattern deployed in millions of households: strict financial silence. The parenting design of the era dictated that families must handle deep structural volatility in total secrecy, never exposing their internal economic struggles to the external world. Because parents masked their own vulnerability, children only ever observed the polished end result of financial stability. This engineered a subconscious rule: competent adults simply do not experience money problems. So the moment you collide with your first inevitable capital crisis, a student loan payment you cannot balance, or rent that devours half your liquid income, you panic. Instead of treating it as a macroeconomic reality, you hide the numbers out of a feeling of personal incompetence. This secrecy surrounding debt stems directly from a generation-long starvation of financial honesty. Which brings us to the final defining command: acquiring a house. For the previous generation, a single blue-collar paycheck commanded immense purchasing power. They secured primary real estate for 2 to 3 times their annual salary within a heavily subsidized economic infrastructure. They took that unique coordinate in history and turned it into a universal mandate. They explicitly instructed their children to buy property immediately, framing homeownership as the ultimate moral rite of passage to prove you were a responsible adult. Young adults desperately attempted to execute that script. They stretched their personal balance sheets to the breaking point, pouring whatever capital they had into massive asset bubbles precisely before the 2008 subprime implosion. A foreclosure signals the collapse of the moral identity your parents tied to property ownership. When parents define homeowner as responsible person, losing the asset forces millions of people to question their basic worth as human beings. Here is the ultimate cognitive glitch we have to dismantle. When millions of younger workers lost their life savings and their jobs, their parents looked at the carnage and failed to comprehend the math. They didn't question the structural volatility of the macroeconomy. They questioned the moral drive of their own children. We have to acknowledge the stark reality of the modern era. The subsidized math of 1978 is dead. Expecting structural corporate stability inside an economic machine that rewards aggressive job hopping and capital optimization is a mathematical delusion. Your financial trauma is a programmed mismatch. You were raised for one specific reality and forced to survive in a completely different world. It is time to reject the structural guilt and stop measuring your survival against a formula that expired decades ago. If this audit illuminated the systemic loops in your own background, drop the worst financial advice your parents gave you in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button to join our global network of elite capital allocators. Keep your liabilities low and optimize your capital for the reality of the modern machine. I will see you in the next strategic audit.